Here are the results, and of course, as we said at the top of the show, Max Verstappen it was who won the Grand Prix ahead of Carlos Sainz of Ferrari, who took fastest lap, Lewis Hamilton and George Russell third and fourth for Mercedes, ahead of Charles Leclerc fifth, Esteban Ocon sixth, Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu finished seventh and eighth for Alfa Romeo Sauber. Fernando Alonso was actually seventh on the road after a penalty. He lines up ninth on the standings, and Lance Stroll rounds out the top 10. Now, Alex, if you would, let's run through the highlights, a few bullet points that Miko has put together for us for this Grand Prix that summarises what happened in the 51st Canadian Grand Prix.
Well, like you said, Alonso wasn't quite able to get Verstappen off the line, was he? So Verstappen took an early and quite easy lead over the opening laps. Sainz was able to get past Alonso into second. And then we saw Verstappen stop at the first virtual safety car for Sergio Perez. And then there's another virtual safety car came out for Mike Schumacher. So Sainz stopped then, and then we saw Hamilton overtaking Alonso for P3. Alonso would fade a bit with some engine issues. Verstappen would then stop under green flag conditions, and Sainz stopped under the last safety car, the only safety car, and that put them really together. You know, Verstappen versus Sainz on the last, 15 laps after the safety car, and Sainz, of course, had 5-lap younger tyres and really made a good go at trying to overtake Verstappen, but it wasn't to be, and Verstappen held on for his win.
It wasn't to be. So, Bob, first of all, question for you. You've probably seen most of Max Verstappen's 25. He's now 26. Let's say 25 of the 26 Grand Prix victories. How does this one rank, do you think?
Well, I think he had it a little bit easier here. Or at least it was meant to be a little bit easier, because in theory, he already had his Charles Leclerc, his closest rival, starting at the back after engine penalties. Sergio Perez also starting well back as well, so we didn't have too much challenge from him. Carlos Sainz is usually the second best of the two Ferrari drivers, so wasn't necessarily going to be up there. So in theory, it was going to be easier for Max Verstappen. But even he admitted it wasn't that easy, and really Carlos Sainz really hooked up with the car extremely well, and Sainz was really on fantastic form and really pushing hard all the way to the checkered flag, as we're well aware. So it wasn't an easy one for Max Verstappen. It was a pretty difficult one, but it certainly kept him on his toes.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to that, Matt. I mean, you know, it was really good seeing Sainz there, but you have to say, if it was Leclerc, it would have been a little bit different. You know, we're used to seeing, because what was very key was on the penultimate lap, Sainz out of the last corner got really close to Verstappen, but he made a mistake, took too much curb. And then on the penultimate lap again, still on the hairpin, leading on the back straight, he also ran a little bit wide there. So these are the crucial moments. I'm not saying Sainz could have still overtaken Verstappen, but it's those sort of crucial moments that when we've seen Leclerc and Verstappen fight earlier in the year at Saudi Arabia and at Bahrain, where you could see them following each other very closely in the dirty air and still not be able to make mistakes. And that's when you saw this position swap between them quite a lot. And you just saw Sainz make those crucial, tiny, tiny mistakes, but maybe just allowed Verstappen to have a slightly easier last lap to the line.
I thought Verstappen was flawless in those last 16 laps after the safety car that you mentioned, Sainz behind him on the newer tyres. And I was surprised to see a stat, not only 26 now Grand Prix victories, but that Max has finished in the top two in 1/3 of all the races that he's competed in Formula One. I was kind of surprised by that stat, actually.
Wow. It's impressive, isn't it? You forget how young he is. Remember when he joined Formula One was he 16 when he joined Formula One, or 17? Just turned 17. And I remember thinking that's way too young. I thought that would end up in disaster. But wow, we've proven wrong, right? He's a bit of a phenomenal driver. I mean, did everything so young. Obviously took a long time to win his first world championship because of the Mercedes domination. And yeah, sometimes he looks quite unstoppable.
We should mention quickly that Sergio Perez had, after a lovely victory at the Monaco Grand Prix, of course, he had a pretty poor outing, didn't he, Bob, in Montreal, both in qualifying and then in the race?
Yes, exactly. He was started well back on the grid in the race itself and never really made much of an impression before he pulled off with a power unit problem. So we don't know exactly what that was, but he really didn't feature at all in the Canadian Grand Prix, and probably is really looking forward to Silverstone, where he can really get his teeth into it again. So as you say,
Absolutely.
after Yeah, winning in Monaco and Azerbaijan. I can't remember what happened there, but it wasn't great. So he's a couple of races to forget, perhaps.